Right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really honored and at the same time terrified to have the difficult task of interviewing this force of nature, Madame Amina. I think you all know Amina, you know her career, what she's up to, what she's doing. So I'll try to do my best. Amina, you're welcome. Thank you very much for coming all the way from New York to join us. I don't think I need to introduce her. Everybody knows Amina through her illustrious career in Nigeria and the UN. So we start straight away. Okay? Right. Amina, we live in a rather difficult period where we see disruption of the global order, the rule-based international order, rise of nationalism, and people moving away also from multilateralism, etc. Now, United Nations is really at the heart of this, and we're wondering, how do you see that world around you from your seat at the pinnacle of United Nations?
Thank you, Mo, and I'm not sure who's more terrified than the other because I'm waiting for the questions he's going to ask me. But hello, everyone. It is not a good place. The global village is not in a good place. It's much more fragmented than we've ever seen it. Multilateralism is, again, big pushback, as is human rights, and as you rightly said, nationalism, popularism. And I think what we have to do in that space is to make sure that we're keeping the conversation alive, and through the actions that we take, that we are showing that the world is better together because the issues are beyond borders. It's good for us to be nationalists. I'm a Nigerian, very proud to be one. And I want to see what it is that we do to invest in our needs. But it cannot be to the exclusion of our neighbors. And that's a reality with a world that's globalized, not very just. We have to think about those cross-border issues that affect the everyday lives of our people, whether it is the migration we talked about today, refugees, climate change, conflict. They're all realities that we can't deal with in isolation. And so with the UN, it's the global town hall. It's where voices are heard. It's where we come up with solutions, where we negotiate the deals and the resolutions that try to make us a more peaceful world. The job's harder. It's harder because people have lost a lot of trust in institutions, and we have to regain that. They've lost trust in democratic processes. At the same time, people we thought were included are excluded universally. We see leaders in parts of the world today where you would wonder how they got into office. They got into office because people voted them into office. And we need to ask why. What was the reason? And I believe that today, as we speak more and more to these populations that are very young, it is exclusion. It is a lack of hope. It is a feeling that systems are not doing the right thing and we need to turn them on their heads. We certainly have our job cut out for us. We have it at the global level, engaging with regional bodies as we do. But also, much more importantly, the UN's footprint at the country level, whether it is development, it is peacekeeping, it is human rights. These are the work. We have to dig in further. We have to keep that door open. We have to continue to give hope to people. We have to, where there is a reality, and we all know it's not very good, where there are the aspirations and the many frameworks that we have, to try to close that gap day in, day out, but to do it together.
Right. I'm trying to phrase this next question in a more sort of polite way, given your sensitive job. Do you see the increasing number of strong men, and we sense an echo of the 1930s, and do you see this is a phase and somehow we're going to regain our balance and we recognize that peace and international cooperation is very important for us? Or do you see it like an infectious disease and those guys are going to keep popping up everywhere and we're going to end up in that difficult situation we faced in 1939?
No, I think that we've recognized that we have a very serious issue. And if we just think it's going to right itself as a matter of course because it's the right thing, no, it's not. I think concerted efforts have to be made in many different fora, including, of course, the UN, but in many other different fora, to try to stop that slide. And I think we need to look at the root causes. We need to have the uncomfortable conversations, and we need to call on leadership to have louder voices. Now, there are many who believe in multilateralism, but we need also to hear the voices of those that believe in it, and that we can further that through actions, investments. Today we heard not just about migration and the figures and the fallacy behind much of the data, but we also heard about root causes, that more people, if okay at home, would rather stay there and have that partnership across. So I think the leaders themselves need to come to terms with that people will not tolerate any longer the positions that they've been in the past, and they do want change. And day in, day out, we are seeing this across the world. I think we have to reinforce the rights of people and their voice, participation. We also have to understand in a democracy, if you don't have educated people, you haven't empowered the vote. You have to know what you're voting for. You have to push the cause for the issues that have to do that. If you don't have an education, how can you possibly begin to make that step? You then become fodder for what politicians may exploit. And I think that this is something that we also have to consider, is that it's not a black and white answer. There are many gray areas that we have to deal with.
Right. In your own realm, the United Nations, many people criticize the United Nations as really based on a world, as they emerged of the Second World War. And in 1945, we ended up with winners and losers. And the winners shaped the world in their image. We end up with a Security Council where UK and France, 3% of the population, have 2 seats of the 5 permanent seats in UN. That's 40% of the veto power, which is a very powerful position. At the same time, we see Japan and Germany. Those guys lost the war. So they also lose the United Nations. They are not there. Either Japan or Germany, any of them is bigger than Britain or France, economically and population-wise, but they're not there. Then we see guys like India, 1.3 billion people are not there. The whole of Africa is not there. Brazil is not there. People start to question the legitimacy of your top institution, the Security Council. Our friend Kofi Annan, whom we celebrated his life last night, launched a formal reform process almost 20 years ago. Where are we with the reform?
Well, first, I think that the Security Council coming about in 1945 was for the right reasons, and I do believe that the UN was not just for a few, it was for everyone. I think that we look at the core values, we look at what we espouse then to keep the peace, that was legitimate. Yeah. That was 1945. 2019, almost 20 years on from the reforms. Yes, legitimacy is a very big question that is going on and is being discussed amongst the member states. I believe that in 2019, our structures aren't fit for purpose. I think that we have to tackle that, and we have to tackle it head on. The Security Council is the most difficult of it. There are 15 members, 5 of them are permanent, and the veto power is there. The reforms are more than just about the veto power, and I think that we have to look at them in their totality and to see what roles we can bring for representation, what roles we can bring for what is, I think, a justified argument for how we deal with the veto. This is a member state issue. As you know, the United Nations and their member states, it's a complex mix of what we are in the world today. And I think a lot of the discussions reflect different times of that. I hope that they can now, as we say, in the most difficult time that we have in our world, where we are more polarized, where we are more divided and fragmented, that this becomes a reason for coming together. And perhaps now is the time for the Security Council reform to really take a hold.
I'll be honest with you, I think your answer is diplomatic, and I understand that. I understand that. She came as Deputy Secretary General. She need to leave as Deputy Secretary General. So we accept that. But for us, people we don't have jobs, so nobody can fire us anyway. So we can say it's really strange. 20 years ago, everybody agreed we need to reform the body. I speak to the Brits, say, yeah, well, of course we need to reform it. I speak to the French, yes, we need to reform it. Okay, reform it. Nothing happens. Everybody, kick the can.
But Mo, we can say that about a lot of institutions, and thank you for giving me the pass mark as diplomat. I wouldn't have been that a few years ago. So I think that we are suffering in institutions in trying to make the changes that we want to. Beyond the Security Council, we're trying a reform on development, on peace and security. But we also see this in many other institutions, and it is a struggle because it is about power, it is about status quo, there are vested interests, and those all come to bear. As I said, there's a reality check. This is where we really are. We do need leaders and voices. Security Council reform will happen if the voices can be proactive. It's not to wait until we come to that discussion, but that we can move that.
Yeah, in our discussion, we're not just targeting the UN, which we, of course, honor. And I think it's very important. But we talk about all multinational. I mean, yesterday, the World Bank appointed yet another American to head the World Bank, as if there's nobody else in the world other than Americans. The French has a lock on the IMF, and as if there's nobody else there. And we really need to move from that pattern where those guys just have a look at all these international institutions as if all other people don't count. And so that's something we need to continue, at least on our side as civil society, to campaign for.
Well, thank God we see this in the UN, right? It's not for any one country. It's for every country. So, I mean, we've seen all the way along, including our own son of Africa, head up.
You know what Kofi used to say? You say, the Charter of UN starts with, we are the people.
We the people.
And the question, where are the people?
They're there.
Where are we?
I'm one of them.
Okay. But one thing you did very well, actually, and everybody praised you for doing, which was something for the people, was the SDG. I don't know if you know how this lady worked hard to develop the SDG, which to get 191 countries or 93 countries and unlimited number of NGOs, of activists to all agree on a document, which is the SDG, which is something very important. That was a job, and what she did brilliantly. Please give her a hand for doing that. This is the engineer of SDG. But it's also legitimate for us to ask you, well done, great job. 4 years ago, where are we now?
4 years ago, we have a stock taking in the General Assembly this year, and so when we have to measure where we are, we can say not very far. We've not moved the needle the way we wanted to on the SDGs. I think we did have gains from the MDGs, but this is now a paradigm shift where we move from doing the social to all of society, all of government approach to it. I think what we do have is a huge engagement with the SDGs, given that it's not a legally binding document. All governments, and we've seen over 130 appear year after year over the 4 years, showing what they've done in terms of tracks towards the SDGs. But as we look at the data, it's not sufficient. Whether it is climate change, addressing poverty, hunger, we're seeing regressions in many parts, and there are many reasons for it, which is why engagement with the Sustainable Development Agenda is important in terms of investments. This is where we see the world falling down. The resources are there, but there's not sufficient coming to where it's needed. Our multilateral institutions, like the African Development Bank, need to have the resources so that they can support our governments to do the things that they need to do. So I think that we are engaged. I don't think we're going fast enough. This is what you will find in September in the data. And that we will have a platform on climate and on financing to say, what is it that we actually have to do to make the connection with the resources and the investments that need it? It's not charity to invest in the Sustainable Development Goals. It is addressing root causes that will hopefully eradicate extreme poverty, but it will reduce conflict. It will reduce the issues that we see of forced migration and refugees. It will address many of the issues that we see today of climate disaster, which can all be prevented.
But are we measuring? I mean, I'm sorry, but our foundation we always believe in data to measure, because we cannot know where you are without data. There is a number of NGOs, I know, coalitions, which trying to measure progress, but there is no like a common platform and agreed methodology. How can we measure our progress?
Well, I mean, the first opportunity we had to give a set of tools like the indicators that we have for the SDGs, which are 169. But where's the baseline data for that? You're absolutely right. We've fallen down completely on that. Not more than a handful of indicators can we push across the world to say we have the baseline for in even 2018. On the poverty data, the World Bank, I believe, is the custodian of that. Until a couple of weeks ago, we were dealing with 2015 data. So what would we say in the General Assembly in 2019 on how we measure? So I think you're absolutely right. We do need to get the data piece right. What is not happening is that our statistical institutions at the country level are taking the opportunity of big data and us getting the investments to bring that closer together. And also, you know, even with civil society, I think that there's one thing for countries to measure, and that's important for them to know where they're coming from and where they're going. But I think we also need the shadow reporting, and that also comes, again, with good data that is aligned. I mean, we have to have the most ambitious data that we can possibly.
But you agree we need to find a way to track,
I was
know where we are.
Yes, I was in the South, I was in Asia Pacific last week. Great database with you know, showing us what we were doing on gender and saying that the country we were in had actually progressed. But of the 7 indicators, they were only measuring 1. So how could you possibly measure what we were doing to effectively address violence, inequality with women when we were only measuring one of the indicators was not sufficient to show us the whole of progress being made towards women?
Right. Let's move to something else which is also very important. United Nations is crucial for peacekeeping. You have a huge peacekeeping operation, which is always almost in the spotlight, because whatever you do, it has to be the spotlight. What is your reflection on your peacekeeping operation? Where it is done well, where it has gone wrong? How do you see that moving forward?
I think one of the things that everyone will recognize with the UN and something we've done well and continue to is the blue helmet, and that's our peacekeepers who put their lives daily on the line. It's also our humanitarian workers that do the same. But peacekeeping is frequently now in many of the conflict areas no longer keeping the peace. They become actually, in the conflict, they become a target. And I think this is where, in looking at the reforms on the peacekeeping, we've tried to say how can they be better equipped? How can we also look in the short and longer term at the prevention and transitions of the conflicts that we have, bring an end to them. The African Union talks about silencing the guns next year. What do we do and what is our role in peacekeeping? Now, there are challenges to this. Today, in the United Nations, paying for the peacekeepers has become a problem. And that's paying for them. Just the budget to pay for the peacekeepers becomes a problem. And I think this challenge is the one that the SG puts on the table. It's the first time that we are talking frankly about the deficits, expecting many peacekeepers who come from Africa, who come from Asia, and you find the governments that have the least stepping up to fill the gap. And I think that this, of course, is not the way the United Nations works in terms of our peacekeepers. In peacekeeping, we're also looking at the profile. By and large, we've not had the number of women we should have in peacekeeping, and we need to see that there is a role that we can play in transitioning from the conflicts into peace, and for that you need mediators, you need those that will be part of the peace building. And here I think that, you know, we are looking to see how we can bring women into that space. There are many other issues that we're dealing with on peacekeeping, but, you know, maybe that's a whole session. But I would say that still...
yeah. I mean, Africa was trying also to establish its own peacekeeping operations and trying to raise funds in order to do that, because we always argued that the African Union should be able to support itself financially. And I don't know how successful, I mean, Kagame was trying, Paul Kagame argued very hard for looking at the funding, how to fund the African Union operations. And I understand there is some issues. Some big countries are not yet on the page. Unfortunately, he's not here to check with him what's happening. Actually, we need to send our regards to our friends in Rwanda. They have this event this weekend about the anniversary of the genocide. And is there a room for cooperation between the African Union and the United Nations in this area? I know Europe is also trying to cooperate with the African Union on peacekeeping. People understand this is a very crucial area for people to cooperate to really keep the peace.
Well, we commend what President Kagame has led on the reforms around peacekeeping, and I think that they have got the right framework for it. Now what you need is leaders to step up and to look at the financing of it. There is a much better cooperation with the AU and the UN on their peacekeeping framework, the peace and security framework. I think that when we look at the spending in peacekeeping, we need to peacekeep to end the conflicts. The resources that we could save from that and put into sustainable development are huge. And I think we underestimate the difference that that will make. So I think there is an imperative today, given the way we're seeing a backtracking from commitments to resources, for us in Africa and other parts of the world to find the peace. We have to find the peace. It is more often than not political. It's about people coming to the table. I mean, we often laugh about it, but actually I think it has some truth to it, that we say climate change is man-made. Many of the conflicts are, and what we need is men and women at the table to try to find the solutions. And no joke in that, we really do need to find the solutions. If we don't find the solutions to peace, it will cost us in lives, it will cost us in our future generations, because they're leaving our countries. And they were losing those resources that we need to build our nations. And I think there is an imperative there. I don't think it is taken in its urgency. As populations grow, become more dissatisfied, it's more difficult to deal with ending the conflicts. We look at what has happened across the Sahel just over the last 5 years. It's dramatic, the increase of conflicts that we don't know how to handle because you cannot recognize the face of those, the terrorists that we see. And I can speak for my own country in northeast Nigeria.
Yes. So far, we addressed some very easy questions because about policy, which you are very good at. We're going to move now to some personal questions, so I'll offer you some water to get ready.
I think this is when you're going to convert me to gin, right? Okay.
This is just water, guys. Now, Amina, you are, no doubt you are a big shot, you know, in United States, etc. But still you are number 2. Now, what exactly is number 2? Do you do the lousy jobs which number 1 doesn't want to do and say, Amina, I need somebody to go to Myanmar because, you know, you need to go to the jungle to do this. And I go to Paris because there is a nice parade there for the peace. I saw him in Champs-Élysées, the nice parade, you know, is wonderful. And what is number 2 job? I mean, let's be frank, really. What's your job, actually? What do you do?
What do I do? Oh, thank you very much, Mo. Okay. What do I do? That's exactly the question my children asked me when I was leaving. So what is it you do? It's a tough question. The number 2 is not the spare tire. But what we have done in the United Nations is there's a division of labor. And I think here the Secretary General was very clear that he has a political portfolio which is every day, 24/7 urgent. That's keeping the peace, trying to make sure the world doesn't blow up on us. My responsibilities are for the development pillar.
The development.
The development pillar. So it does include the SDGs, but it also includes the finance, includes migration, it includes a number of other issues that are interactive with it, the whole development system, which is over 42 of our agencies. But there is a responsibility in the new reforms for us to make the linkages with peace and security and with human rights. So I would say I'm in a good place, because when the salvos come, they hit him, not me.
No, but of course you love development. I mean, that's an area I always worked. But that's actually a tough area. I mean, it's very easy to do the number. To be honest, I don't know, but I think it's easy, because General Haftar going into Tripoli says, stop, don't do that. America recognizes Golan, oh no, this is not fair. You just make a statement and go to sleep. Is that, I mean, what else are you going to do?
So, no, we don't go to sleep. We're 24/7 working on the next
But to work to finance development, that's a nightmare.
Yes, it is, it is. I can see Akin Adishina on the front row there. So, yeah, it is. When we have to fight for the resources that are required for an agreement, we all sat down and said, yes, this is the way to go. It is very frustrating, even with the same constituents that agreed it. So it is, but I think, we as a global community agreed this, and I find that there are the partnerships that we are garnering to do it. It's not a job we do alone, and I think recognition that we are not the only ones to do it is the first, first point of wisdom, and I think that perhaps the reform is the most difficult, because, as I said earlier, institutions aren't fit for purpose. We're trying to make ours much more relevant and responsive at the country level, at the regional level. That's tough, because people like the status quo. There's what
That's heavy lifting.
It's heavy lifting.
Okay.
Particularly the men, they're really heavy.
Absolutely. So in few years, number one slot will be available. Wouldn't you think of moving to the much easier, glamorous job? What is your idea?
First, I don't think...
We never had a lady leading the United Nations.
And we will, inshallah, have a woman Secretary General in the near future. I believe strongly in that. I also believe that it's not a glamorous job. This is a tough job. One of the things you get to see as the deputy is the good, the bad, and the ugly. You get to see what this is. And I think that as we look to see the best woman for the job, it's one that we need to take all those considerations. The skill sets that you need to become the Secretary General of the United Nations in the world that we are today and maybe tomorrow, because we have to think forward, are pretty serious. And I do think that we have the women, and I think that
But Amina, you have a rotation system.
Yes.
You know, sometime Asian, European, African.
Yes.
Who's next? I think it's our turn next time, no?
No, it's not.
We had an Asian.
It's not.
Now we have a European.
It's an unspoken rule, right? This rotation, and it didn't happen this last time because the Eastern European, of course, Antonio Guterres is not Eastern European. I think that whatever happens in the next election, I don't think it matters where you come from. The fact that you will be a woman that belongs to the world, and it will be the first time, is good enough to get us into that position.
Okay.
And if I will make the best campaign manager.
No. I'm ready to campaign for you. I'm happy to be your campaign manager. I think you will be a wonderful number one in UN, and we'll do that. But okay, enough of United Nations. You are also Nigerian. Maybe you need to talk a little bit about Nigeria. You did serve as a minister. Some water.
I'm going to be asking for the gin soon.
Nigeria is a very interesting country in Africa. Everywhere you see Nigeria, which is not difficult because you are out of every 4 people, I think, in Africa, 1 is Nigerian, I suppose. So it is the most popular. It's very important for Africa. You have been a minister in Nigeria, and honestly, was it more difficult to be a minister in Nigeria or to be a number 2 United Nations? Really, frankly.
Oh, dear. Okay, first, Nigeria, best country in the world, number 1.
I thought we agreed that we don't like nationalism. How can the most global woman in the United Nations start to be a nationalist?
Mo, I have to come from
What's
somewhere.
wrong with Sudan?
I'm coming for somewhere.
What's wrong with Cote d'Ivoire?
Don't worry, we will bring you with us.
Okay.
We're multilateralists, okay? No, you know, the job that I had as minister in Nigeria is one of the greatest honors that I've had. I actually think it's a much easier job than the Deputy Secretary General.
Much easier?
Much easier. Why? Because this is where you sit in government. You're given the responsibility, the voice, and the power to do things for people. Whereas in the United Nations, we are serving the member states to do something for the people, so there's a lot more negotiation. And that's where I found that, you know, at home, portfolio, go ahead and do what you need to do. The president gives you full backing to do it. And you can go. You can speak in the world of the voice of Nigeria on any platform. But in the United Nations, I'm the humble servant of 193 member states, and you negotiate. So I think, you know, both have their values. It's not one is more complicated than the other, but no, I thoroughly enjoyed my job and happy to bring the experiences.
So that leads us to other question. If you are so happy serving in Nigeria, now we
okay, I need the gin
I mean,
now.
she said that. Now, your country has always been run by some interesting old men, some in uniform, some business tycoon, some, you know, this, some that. When are we going to have a woman?
In 2023.
2023.
Inshallah.
Would you consider running?
Here we go again. Look, look, all of my life has been as a public servant and as one that serves, and so that's not a problem for me. But let me be truthful here. I've always thought that I'm appointable and not electable.
Because you're honest and straightforward?
No, not because
you don't take bribes?
No, I don't.
Is that why you're not electable? Let's be honest. Yeah, this is a frank conversation. Okay. Why aren't you electable?
Okay, so now I'm speaking as a Nigerian, not as a DSG.
Yes, of course, as a Nigerian, forget about United Nations. Yeah.
I think the political system that we have in our country, I believe in democracy, but I think the model for us where we are is an incredibly difficult environment to say that you would come to office through the will of the people. I think the manipulation of democracy is a very serious issue in our countries. I believe that we have a population, as I said, has a level of literacy that can be manipulated. That's not right. Yeah. And so, you know, I think that the fact that we got President Buhari in office this time was somewhat of a miracle, because really it is not easy to do it on that straight and narrow. Now, I think this is a work in progress. Democracy in my country is a work in progress. We have 3 arms of government. We have a federal system. It's incredibly difficult. And that's why I believe that, you know, I'd make a really good campaign manager for the next woman president as well.
Why you always talk about campaign managing?
Because it's very important. We need to start from today to get a woman in power in 2023. And I'm the Deputy Secretary General. And I'm enjoying my job right now. I think it's a great job, and I think I have a lot to contribute, and I hope that I leave the place better than I've met it. So I think there are competent Nigerians, and I think that they should be mobilized to see that a woman gets into power next time, because Nigeria deserves a woman, deserves a leader that can take 180 million people to a place where they should be, and that I can say, yes, I know my Nigeria is the #1 country in the world, but it needs to earn it as well. And that earning needs good leadership. That good leadership is a Nigerian woman. Okay, now can I go?
Are you implying there is a glass ceiling for women in Nigeria under the current system and arrangement? Is there a glass ceiling actually?
I think, you know, no, I don't think there's a glass ceiling. I think there's a concrete one.
More.
And we need to consistently chisel away until we find the crack and we get through it, and we can truly say that our representation is genuine, it's credible, and it's just.
But, Amina, there is a whole kind of changes around us. We can see somebody like Macron in France. He come from nowhere with no party, but he managed to touch a nerve and get elected. And actually, his people, a new party, control the parliament. Why don't we see a new political movement in Nigeria, for example? You have a huge number of young people who can relate to what you are saying, and people come and say, let's change the political structure here. Let's move forward. Let's do something else. Is that not possible in Nigeria?
It is possible, but I think, let's not compare apples and oranges. France has solid institutions and a track where those institutions have seen the test of time. We don't. Our institutions are weak in a federal system, and they need strengthening. So when we're planning for a woman or, a woman to be president in Nigeria, we have to think about the institutions and what we need to put in place to strengthen them. I hope that in this next term that President Buhari has, that there's a lot of investment that goes into strengthening those institutions that hold up democracy, the judiciary, the parliament, and of course the executive. It is about strong institutions. We will not deliver on the scale of what we have to do for every single one of us around the world without them, and particularly in my country.
Before we open this for questions, of course we need to have freedom flow of questioning. Just one last question. You are always in an aeroplane. Where are you going to fly out from here? Where are you going from here? Are you going back to New York, or where are you going from here?
No, from here I go to Beirut.
To Beirut?
Yes.
Shopping?
That's what we do as Nigerians. No, as the Deputy Secretary General, we have a number of issues in that region that are of concern to us. We now have hope that the peace in Syria will hold. And so therefore the issue of refugees in Lebanon is a very challenging one, and we try to look at how we can solve some of the tensions that we see there.
Lebanon has so many Syrian refugees.
They do. I mean, they have been generous. This is, there are countries with a lot of generosity, Jordan, where the SG is today, Lebanon. But we do have to resolve some of those issues where people do want to go home, but are they safe? Can they have safe return, and can they join and be reintegrated into their societies after such conflict? These are some of the issues that we will be discussing when we're in Lebanon.
Well, it's still work for you. We can think that we have time for 2 questions. I think we have almost 1 or 2 minutes left. Any questions from the floor, please? Do you want to pick up the questions, or I pick them up? Or?
No, you do it. There's a lady there.
Please, there's a lady over there. And after that, the gentleman over there with the glasses, yeah? Questions, please, not statements. Please get the second mic ready so don't lose time.
Okay, good afternoon, sir and Madam Amina. My name is Islamiyat. I'm a student of political science in the International University of Grand Bassam. So I'm a Nigerian. So my question got thus. Why don't you represent us, since you have the willingness and you've worked a lot in the social and civil environment, in the next year to come? Because it takes someone to stand up for the rest of us. When we have no one standing up for us, then females will always be at the back of the world, I think.
Well, thank you. We have a volunteer campaign manager here. Thank you. Second question.
Hi, I'm Anand Singh from South Africa. The UN is owed by member states $2 billion. And just as a businessman, and I'm on certain committees, when people don't pay their dues, you suspend them or you evict them. And this has been an ongoing debt, and the sustainability is an issue. I just thought that could be something, and why don't you implement those kind of things? And the US owes a third of that, from what I can gather, and that's quite terrible in the way we see it. Also, I think UN television is something that is an underutilized asset, and that could be a revenue stream that, if properly leveraged. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points. I mean, first of all, you'd be surprised. What we talk about are the arrears. Most countries pay just before D-Day, but the arrears affect us in the time that we have. We need the cash flow to actually put those and pay for those peacekeepers, our humanitarian people there and then. The conversation that has recently been had over the last 9 months with the SG on the funding has produced almost a 50% reduction in those arrears. So I think we do have to use, as you say, there are rules there. You don't pay, you don't vote, and I think that that's actually coming to fruition. But we do, as I say, need much more in development. Peacekeeping is one thing. We need to make that budget transition for keeping the peace into sustaining development. That's really where we need to be. You're right about communications. I think we have not a very good communication capacity, and we need to do something about that. Join 2019, where we can communicate to young people, which are the largest cohort, but the rest in these times when multilateralism is taking a hit. So take your point for UN TV back with me to New York.
Thank you, Amina, very much. That's all what we have time for you. Please
Thank you.
thank this wonderful African woman.